The prompts today are lace and postcard. Hello and welcome to the treasured page. I'm Melanie and this is our quiet crafting space. And it's day 12 of Dephemerember and I want to have a look at the story of Marianne North and dive right into this prompt. I found this strip of lace and this is where I'm going to just base the idea around this piece of lace in this colour tone. I'm not going to dye it or change it or any of those things. I wanted in keeping with the style of my journal, which is in the 1800s, and so we would be looking at white or cream linen and cottons and things like that. So we're just going to keep this, and I think that this piece of lace really just needs to find itself a space within this journal, and then we can go from there. And when we know what page it's going to live on, then we can decide how best to embellish it and bring in the idea of the postcard. So that's sort of, it's a bit like Cinderella trying to find the foot that fits the shoe. So I'm going to go through the journal and have a quick look. Okay, so we've been looking at the story of Marianne North, and we left it last time that she was about to embark on her intrepid discoveries and her intrepid explore across the Atlantic Ocean to America. So that is where we're heading, and she is ultimately en route to Japan, but that comes much later. First of all, she heads to America, and in order to do that, being a woman in that time, she couldn't travel alone. That would have been a real problem. So she would have had to have a travelling companion, and also to try and be able to get to these places and be able to be welcomed and to have any kind of accommodation and perhaps a guide when you got there, you would need something very special, and that is something that Marianne already had. She had connections, and therefore she could get letters of introduction. So she could use her contacts through Charles Darwin. She could use her contacts that she had through her father's connection with the British Parliament. She could use her connections through the botanical aspect of knowing the directors of Kew Gardens in London, and through all of these sources she got these letters, which it just enabled her to travel to anywhere she wanted across the world. And she was very fortunate because she had inherited a fortune from her father. She had made a conscious decision not to get married. In fact, the whole idea of it appalled her. She felt that getting married is very close to being an upper-class servant, and it would mean the loss of freedom and the loss of her money as well. And money, of course, meant she could travel. She could travel the world, and she could travel to where she wanted to. She wanted to go to South America. She wanted to go to North America. She wanted to go everywhere. She'd already been through Europe with her father, and now it was time to spread her wings. She was in her 40s, she was free, she had money, she had contacts, and she was off to paint botanical images in the tropics. That's the place. That's where it's going to live. So let's hear a little bit more about Marianne and what her brother-in-law thought of her. So her sister had married 2 years before her father passed away, and Marianne had to look after the father as they travelled around. It was something that she never complained of doing. She was absolutely, totally and utterly 100% wanting to be with her father, and he was her one person that she really, really felt very close to. So her brother-in-law was John Ashlington Symonds. Described her as blonde, stout, tall and good-humoured, and they all got on very well as a family. The one thing that Marianne couldn't get on with was uninteresting society people. They used to bore her. If they were talking about fashion or anything that didn't interest her, she would switch off completely. She wanted to surround herself with intelligent, well-learnt, well-educated people that had new, fresh ideas, ideas that would interest her and take her away from the boring, mundane that was the constant, what we've always done. She yearned for change, and she wanted to be inspired by artists and poets, bohemians and the like. So for this task, I've been looking at all my lace ideas. I've been bringing in bits and pieces, but I'm not really happy with that, so I haven't gone further with it. I've got this scrap here, which seems to keep jumping in. So the other thing I found is some lace punches. I've had these a while, and they don't really see much of an outing, so I thought this might be something I could use. So I'm just going to put those off to one side. Today's prompt animal was the hare, so we're going to bring the hare in as well. So I've got a loose idea forming here. I've got these scraps that I'm going to bring in and try and make them look like postcards. I've got my hare, which I've just backed onto some thicker card. This was an old clothing tag, so I'm going to cut him out, and then I think he'll come and live down here just to be part of it. Excuse the paint splatters on the desk. This is a working environment now, and I'm going to fussy cut out the hair. Then we're going to have a look and see if we can make postcards of these scraps. So I've looked up a bit of history about postcards, and the first postcard was invented in 1869, and that is the same year that Marianne lost her father and decided to go off to Europe, and she spent some time in mourning over in Italy. Well, the first postcard was invented in Vienna, Austria. So I thought that was a fun fact, considering that this Dephemerember, one of our hosts, is Barbara from 49 Dragonflies. And so I thought that was quite interesting because of their prompts with the postcard for today. And that being said, the postcard was in existence in Marianne's time, but it wouldn't have been that popular. However, she would probably be aware of it because she was very interested in communication. She was interested in anything new, and anything of that nature I'm sure she would have been interested and involved in, because she would have liked to have sent letters back to her friends in England on her adventures. And not only that, she was in touch with her sister also, and her brother-in-law. Marianne North never married. She was not without suitors, and she was not unattractive, and obviously she had this wealth of money, so it was all very attractive offer to somebody. She had suitors in abundance, but it was not for her. So she was off on her adventures, off with her newfound fortune from her inheritance, and off to find some adventures and ultimately the plants that she was so interested in. In fact, that looks like a bit of lace on the side, so I'll put that on there as well. Right, okay, not sure about this challenge. So the other thing I've got is these punches, so I might just now put a punch in here. I've got this, I've punched some holes there. I don't know if that shows. Right, using my tweezers, I'm just going to thread through this lace. So Marianne in 1971 decides she's got her money, she needs to go to the tropics. She needs to be free and just go and paint somewhere, and the decision is made to go to America for her very first voyage and just see how she gets on. So she has a friend from America, it's a family friend, and it's Mrs. Skinner. She comes over from America, from Massachusetts, and she comes to spend time over here and to have time shopping and all of those things. And then on the way back, she is going to be the travelling companion for Marianne. Well, this is all arranged, and it works both ways. So Mrs. Skinner has a travelling companion also. And she comes over. They come over with friends, I believe, as well. So Mrs. Skinner has some friends, some other American friends, and they all travel on the ship over to Boston. And that's what happens. So that's okay, apart from it is a very long, arduous journey over in that point in history. She's chosen Mrs. Skinner as her travelling companion for the very first leg of her journey because she's jolly, she's bubbly, she seems to be able to lift Marianne's mood, so she stops brooding about her father and is able to relax. And that's the purpose of Mrs. Skinner. That's just sort of the wonderful thing that she's able to do for Marianne. She's an upbeat character, or so it would appear. One of the first things that Marianne does when she arrives in America to have some time to recoup from the journey over and stay at Mrs. Skinner's house is to go swimming. She wants to go bathing in the sea. It's warm, it's wonderful. She sees all the natural world that is around her, the ferns, the white orchids that she finds. She finds little hummingbirds. She's never seen anything like it. It's absolutely brilliant. She's gleeful. She's excited. She's finally got to a place where she wanted to see and has yearned for so many years. And so she's sort of felt a freedom that she hasn't done in years. So Marianne describes Mrs. Skinner as full of laughter, and when she first sees her and she arrives to embark on the journeys, she's described as having tightly curled hair that's silvery blonde, and then on top of her head was a spider web of purple. She was a very dressed to impress lady, and she had lots of contacts and just was good fun by all accounts. That's certainly the impression that we get. But one thing Marianne notices is that Mrs. Skinner travels with an enormous amount of luggage, and when they're on this ship on their way to Boston, it is an absolute struggle to try and get this luggage where it needs to be. And so it is quite difficult, and apparently so is Mrs. Skinner. So after all time, the jolly laughter and wonderful mood starts to wane, and they start to sink into little snags and little snipes and a few cross words. However, all is relaxed when they are back and they are settled at Mrs. Skinner's home, and that they have the chance to relax. And postcards or letters could be written back home to say that she's arrived safely and that she's in America. The next leg of her journey then goes on to Canada, but before that, with the excitement of arriving at her destination, one thing on her mind, and a very fun thing, is to go swimming and bathing in the sea. And so what happens is the two, Mrs. Skinner and Marianne North, buy swags of fabric so that they can have special bathing suits made for the purpose of going and enjoying themselves in the sea. And Marianne has a dark blue colour and Mrs. Skinner has a scarlet red, and it's remarked by Marianne that they ended up looking like a pair of lobsters. One was uncooked and one had been quite thoroughly boiled. And then what happens is they embark on their next adventure, which is over to Canada, and they take the steamer, they take the train. They ultimately are heading towards Toronto and Quebec and Toronto. But as a whole, Marianne didn't care for intimate travelling companions. She preferred to be on her own. She was a quiet, artistic person. She needed time to think and process what she was experiencing. It was a huge, big deal for her. There was a lot to take in and a lot to manifest in your mind if you're wanting to do anything artistic. It obviously takes a lot of thought process, and that's not easy when you've got somebody twittering in your ear constantly, chattering and being trying to be the life and soul of the party, but actually everybody's getting a little bit tired, and the amount of travel that is required and the some of the places they had to go, and it was arduous in that time. And so I think that it was a bit difficult for them as a couple travelling together to hold it together for that long. And when they reach their destination with the most ridiculous amount of luggage of Mrs. Skinner, Marianne is growing very weary of her, because she just has these volatile outbursts that Marianne can't put up with. So they head to the Station Hotel at Clifton, and they are at Niagara Falls, and this is where Marianne starts to rebel. The quarrelling has gone on for weeks. Mrs. Skinner has been very difficult. Her outbursts and her general carrying on has just got too much for both of them. And what's happened is they've got to this hotel and it's not good enough for Mrs. Skinner. She wants to go to somewhere grander, and Marianne just says, you can do what you like, but I shall be staying here painting and resting for the next 2 weeks. Well, that's it. They all fall out. And the next thing is that Mrs. Skinner's son is sent for, and he comes and removes his mother, and Marianne is left in peace to paint Niagara Falls. And she does so, and she is looked after by the hotel, and they make sure that she has enough hot drinks and coffee as she sits for hours and hours trying to paint and not fall in to Niagara Falls. Well, Marianne has been bowled over by America and Canada, and she's just at a loss for words with all the beautiful russets and reds of the sycamore trees, the maple trees, and everything that she discovers when she's in Canada. After Canada, she heads back to New York, and she is surprised and astounded by the cost of living there, and she can understand why American women like to travel and buy their clothing and their gloves and their dresses and their fabric from Europe. And then she goes on to Washington with her letters of introduction. There's a mistaken identity, and she's asked to dinner at the White House. And she goes, and she's quite alarmed, much like this scared rabbit here, or this hare, which is actually quite fitting because the hare is native to North America. So this works out, this lovely prompt here, because we are talking about America at the moment. And the patriotic colours are coming in here. I hope you like that, ladies. So there we go. And then I've got some images here, but yeah, she has to go and have a dinner with the president at the White House. She's got this invitation. She's completely baffled as to why she's been invited. She has this dinner with President Grant of the time, and she has to attend the opening of Congress. And then they realise that they've made a mistake, and she's not actually the daughter of the ex-Prime Minister, Lord North from England. And the whole thing's rather embarrassing. And she sort of has to make a decision on what she wants to do next. So after that little faux pas, which is not her fault at all, she then decides to head on over to someplace much warmer, because it's December and it is starting to get very cold in New York, and there's snow that's fallen. It's the 15th of December when she boards a steamer bound for Jamaica, and that's where we'll leave the story there. But I just want to show you her artwork from California and where she visits. So these are all from her USA leg of the journey, but actually she comes back, she returns, and she goes once again through America to get to Japan. So on this very first initial journey, just finding her feet, she goes to America, Canada, Jamaica, and then she returns home, and she brings her paintings back for all to see, and then she goes off again. So this would be the second time she returns back to America, because it's a good place to then be able to go off to other places that she wants to visit. So this is in New Hampshire, the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and then we've got some natural flora here, well, natural wildflowers of California, and then we've seen that, the lovely redwood and red cedar tree. This one's called The Ghost of the Big Tree, and you can see there it is, the one in the background. And then she has painted the hummingbirds. She wanted to show the hummingbirds. And we do know that Marianne North is incredibly fond of animals and absolutely has the greatest of respect for animals. And that's why it's lovely that these are being brought into the journal as well through this fantastic prompt that all just seems to be fitting. And there's another one from her trip to California in 1875. These are all from 1875. And then this one is of Arizona, again 1875, when she goes there. So there we go, because I know we have subscribers from all of these places. So we've talked about Canada and Arizona, New Hampshire and California. So shout out to all of the subscribers there. This is what it looked like in 1875. Hopefully there are still some elements of this to be found today. Let's hope so. Do write in and tell me if you have recognised any. I mean, I've never seen a hummingbird, but I do know that my mother travelled to California and she saw the hummingbirds and was amazed by them, just as I am looking at this painting now and being quite amazed by that, thinking how absolutely wonderful, because we don't have that dramatic landscape here in the UK. No, well, we do and we don't. We do in Scotland and places. You really have to travel for it, and it's certainly not rainbows and waterfalls, but there we go. The world is a changing place, and that was a long time ago, over 140 years ago, wasn't it? So there we go, that's it today. Oh, I'll tell you what, we could put some in here. It's probably a bit too much, but yeah, those are my postcards and lace. Postcards and lace, and I'm feeling like I just want... So I'm just going to stick this lace down here and put a little flower embellishment on the top like that, just to sort of finish that off. And just a couple of updates. I have sent off all of my prizes, which is great. So that's all happened. And we can just hope that the postal strikes here with the postal workers don't affect things too much. But they're on their way. So well done for everybody. And that's all happened. So the next thing we'll have a look at is probably having a look at her Jamaican trip and being able to relax there, finally getting to the tropics is where she wanted to go all along. So America is a pit stop for Marianne as she embarks over to the warmer climate, and it's reported that she doesn't like the cold at all. She is not interested, and she would much rather live in a warmer climate. So she will be definitely pleased to be leaving New York in the winter, because it's all snowy and not very pleasant when you are in that era. It's just a bit of walnut stain. I just want to age up the flower there. It's a little bit too bright, as is the lace. I'm just bringing in the prompts. I've noticed this little gap here, and I think it might just be quite nice to have a word in there, and it's part of my journaling as well. And strong is just coming out at me. I don't think that this was one of my stronger pieces, but the story behind it is a woman showing great strength, travelling, standing up for herself. I think Marianne North showed great strength of character there, being able to tell her travelling companion that she could go if she wanted. So that's just great, isn't it? That's just something that we can all take forward, is to stand up for ourselves and what we know is right and what we believe in. And when we need to rest, we need to rest. And that's absolutely what was said here. So yes, and the little scared rabbit, it must have been a very scary thing to do, to travel the world, but you know, as long as you stick to what you know, and I'm sure they had a wonderful time swimming and enjoying themselves as well. Okay, and sticking to what she believed in. And thank goodness she did, because she carried on to paint some most amazing things. So stay strong wherever you are, and above everything else, guys, just slow down and make crafting time for you. Bye-bye now.